Okay, we'll call the regular meeting of council to order at 3 p.m. And I'm going to ask Councillor Kinghorn for a motion that council adopt the agenda for the regular meeting of council January 11th, 2021, as amended, to add items 8.5 being the Community Vitality Advisory Committee appointments and 8.6 being board and committee appointments, and 8.7 regarding the Alberta coal policy reinstatement.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. I will give you that motion.
Thank you very much. All in favor? Motion is carried. As for a motion from Councillor Moore that council adopt the special council meeting minutes from December 8th, 2020 as presented.
I will make that motion.
Thank you. All in favor? Motion is carried. As for a motion, Councillor Masterman, that council adopt the regular council meeting minutes from December 14th, 2020 as presented.
I'd be happy to make that motion, Mayor Snodgrass. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor? Motion is carried. As for a motion, Councillor Nychuk, the council adopt the special council meeting minutes from December 14th, 2020 as presented.
Make that motion for you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All in favor? Motion is carried. Kara, public comments?
There are no public comments.
Thank you very much. So we'll move right into the public hearing. This public hearing is held pursuant to the Municipal Government Act, RSA 2000, Chapter M26, and amendments thereto. I hereby declare the public hearing relating to bylaw 4586/2020 now open at 3:02 p.m.
So the purpose of bylaw 4586/2020 is to impose and provide for the payment of levies to be known as offsite levies in respect of land that is to be subdivided or developed, to authorize agreements to be entered into in respect of payment of offsite levies, to set out the objectives of each offsite levy, and to indicate how the amount of each offsite levy was determined. This public hearing was advertised on the Town of High River's webpage and social media pages on Friday, December 4th. The town crier advertised the hearing date on December 11th and December 24th. Additionally, the public hearing was posted on the town's outdoor notice board. Hard copies of the offsite levy bylaw have been available for the public at the reception desk at Town Hall, and to date, 3 letters of submission have been received.
The following rules of conduct will be followed during this public hearing. Presentation should be brief and to the point and shall be limited to 5 minutes in length. The order of presentations will be engineering, those supporting the bylaw, those opposing the bylaw, and any other person deemed to be affected by the bylaw. Council may ask questions of the speakers after each presentation. For clarification purposes, there will be no debating the bylaw. Respect for staff, developers, council, and the public will be maintained at all times. So I'll put it over to Kaylee with our engineering department.
Good afternoon, Mayor Snodgrass and Council. I am just going to pull up my presentation for you. Is this able to be seen by everyone? It should say offsite levy bylaw update.
We got her.
Fantastic. Okay, so as Kara had mentioned, through the MGA, the town of High River can impose an offsite levy bylaw which charges developers to pay the town. These funds help with the capital costs and improvements and expansions to our infrastructure required as a result of new growth and development within our town boundaries. Original bylaw was in place back in 2013, and this is our current bylaw that we have in place. We then completed, as you are aware, a utility master plan update. This reviewed a lot of our infrastructure, what the current conditions are and what upgrades will be needed at what point. And it also determines some of the basic values. This will also determine around a lot of our growth and what the growth plan is for within the town of High River. The town also engaged ISL afterwards to undertake our offsite levy review. A lot of this would take into account the construction rates and how they may have changed since the previous offsite levy bylaw was put in place. Additionally, we wanted to take a look at the town's growth, what has taken place, and what the future town growth looks like, knowing that sometimes this would change as the years go on. Back in 2018, there was an amendment to the MGA, which then allowed us to add in the expansion of some of our community facilities. This is important because a lot of these community facilities are impacted by growth. So our rec centers, our police stations, our fire, and a few other facilities. So it was nice to see this was taken into account. And so this was also taken into account as we were doing the offsite levy update. And this would have impacts on some of our rates. In 2020, offsite levies were finalized, and we also completed some engagement. Through the update of our offsite levies, of course, we took a look at some of our neighboring municipalities. While we can't really compare apples to apples because each municipality determines their growth differently, some really looking to have that growth and encourage growth, maybe some municipalities not looking for as much growth, and also based on the changes to the MGA. Not all municipalities have had an opportunity yet to implement the changes that have taken place in the municipality. So this gave us a good idea as to where we sat with regards to our rates. So with regards to engagement, we have taken a fair amount of engagement to ensure that all stakeholders involved are aware of what the changes are going to take place with this new bylaw. So back in 2018, an open house was held along with some information packages that went out. Back in 2019, first reading was held along with a public hearing later afterwards. As you are aware, the second reading was defeated because more engagement was encouraged, which did bring some great feedback through our workshop, and we also provided some feedback with council to have the conversation of what kind of feedback we were receiving. Again, we then presented our offset levy bylaw for its first reading on November 23rd in 2020. With a lot of the engagement, we received a lot of feedback as to how these increased rates are going to affect development within the town of High River. Taking into account, we have proposed a 3-year phase-in plan so that there wouldn't be a very large growth in fees from the current rates to the new rates. And so by giving us that 3-year, we'll see an incremental growth in the fees over the next 3 years. Additionally, in the review of the feedback, we took a look at what growth really meant within the town of High River, and really what impacts we're going to see on our infrastructure, because we want to ensure that some of those projects that are so far out, it really wouldn't make sense to be collecting those rates. And so that would really have some impact on maybe keeping the rates on a lower, more reasonable value. We also are looking at putting in a better defined timing that we're going to start collecting these offset levies. As of right now, we've been kind of doing as is approach on each of our individual developments that come in. And so we'd like to get down to more of a consistent process, because this would make it a whole lot easier for us to be able to consistently collect the offset levies and not miss the date of offset levy collection. So our proposal was 10% to be paid at the time of the subdivision servicing agreement, 45% paid 1 year later, and then 45% paid at the 2 years. This also matches our subdivision agreement, which is 2 years that we would like to see subdivision and the agreement work within the agreement completed. So I'd like to open the floor for any questions that may have come from my presentation. Oh, and sorry, I just do need to bring up one thing. We did notice there was the odd grammar error in the bylaw, so I'll be making those changes and ensuring that hopefully there are no further errors once we bring the bylaw for second and third reading.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kaylee. Councillor Masterman, question?
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass, and thanks, Kaylee, for the presentation. And since you did mention grammar, I'll just start off by saying page 17, the heading at the top, after the word "to," I believe you need a word "for" that's missing. So, but my question is more around changes that might have occurred after the public input specifically the workshop that was held in September of 2019. A few of the submissions that we read in relation to this hearing suggested that there were lots of suggestions made at that workshop, but none of them were incorporated. And I'm just kind of curious for your take on that.
For sure. So
I can jump in on that one, Kaylee.
okay, perfect. Because as I say, I wasn't around in 2019. I apologize. So I'll let Riley speak to this.
So I actually don't have it in front of me, Bruce, so I'm not going to go item by item. I'll just speak in more general terms. What happened was we did do the workshop. There were a number of suggestions coming out of that. We did present, basically a summary to council during that committee of the whole meeting Kaylee identified, and worked through each and every one in terms of what was appropriate, what made sense. A number of them the number of suggestions don't impact the offsite levies directly. So for example, there was a lot around encouraging growth or promoting the town that had more of an economic development portion and wouldn't necessarily impact the rates. And so after council, we took that conversation. There wasn't a lot in terms of flexibility or desire to change the rates, because at the end of the day, the philosophy has been growth pays. And so you're correct, Councillor Masterman, there isn't a huge amount of change in what's being presented here. Kaylee did outline some of the changes in terms of the long-term plans being, or very distant projects being removed. And there was some work in the report to clarify how we did that. But you're right, there wasn't a lot of change.
Okay, thanks so much, Riley.
Councillor Cooey?
Thanks very much. I think probably Riley's going to have the same answer. Mine was just a little bit different. I was curious what the highlighted differences might be between the original presentation of the bylaw to this one. But maybe you just answered that with Bruce's question based on the workshops. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, nothing to add.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor McMillan?
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass, and thank you very much, Kaylee and Riley. My question is around, there was a lot of feedback at that workshop regarding the impracticability of basing that ISL report out to a population of 50,000. So I've noticed that that's still part of the report. So I'm just wondering, does that seem reasonable?
So Councillor McMillan, to us, yes, it does. We want to definitely plan for our growth boundary. I think the more of the issue was in terms of the growth horizons. So that's where we have looked at, again, some of these longer range projects that are for those higher population targets and scaled them back or removed them from the study. So there was a couple projects we did say that, from a population or time horizon that's too far out, and scaled that back. And so that's how we've addressed that.
And also, also for consistency, we were trying to keep all of our documents to refer back to the CMRB, so we have some consistency in all of our documents when it talks about our growth and what growth we're planning out to.
Thanks, Kaylee.
You're welcome.
No further questions, so we will go forward to, we don't have anybody in the docket that supports the bylaw that's wishing to speak, so I'll move directly to Les Rempa with Red Tail Development Corp speaking in opposition to the bylaw. Les available? There. Can you hear us, Les?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, we got you, so we're good to go.
No, I'm,
Now you're muted.
how's that?
There, we got you back. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to speak. The bylaw references a consultation with members of the development industry, and there was a workshop discussion set up last September 9, 2019. However, it does not appear that the concerns raised at the workshop were addressed in the bylaw. The 3-year phased increase to levies has the optic of softening the impact on the development. While in real time, any new development would likely take 2 years to clear approvals, and so the phased implementation has very little benefit to the development industry. Taken as a whole, the offsite levy plan is a grand and wonderful, but beyond capacity for the town to financially afford. It's imperative that the planning document needs to be a living document that has the ability to be used in the economic context of the day. The development and timing of major infrastructure needs to have a level of practical collaboration to manage the finances of the town, as well as make projects viable for economic growth in the community. These complex and perhaps competing motivations could lead to emotional planning negotiations that may not always be settled appropriately. There needs to be an application of the general planning practice that aligns the philosophy of growth management with fiscal responsibility, working in the context of the present strength or weakness of the economy. The offsite bylaws should also include a council and community long-range planning strategy using the schedule of costs as the ultimate potential, with a collaboration discussion between council, staff, and developers to find a balanced approach in the timing and scale of investment in order to manage the development and guide the community through the growth patterns as they arise. Many of the projects you'll notice were noted as developer funded because they're isolated to specific areas, and that's appropriate. But let me give you an example of some projects that were listed that sound appropriate, but have a flawed cost recovery strategy. Projects WL2 through 7 are referred to typically as the Northwest Water Supply and Treatment Supply for water. And there are 6 projects, but in fact, they're linked because they all have to be built in concert. And the total value of those projects are about 71 million, with the assumption that 70% of that cost would be funded through offsite levies. So about 50 million through the offsite levy project. And this group of projects may be triggered, in fact, before the development can actually start in the Northwest. And that means that that 70% portion is going to have to be financed through levies ultimately, but would have to be paid for or financed in some way other than that in the present. A typical development would proceed in phases as well, which means that a single phase might have 10 to 20 hectares or 25 to 50 acres, if that makes more sense to us. And that represents about $4 million in offsite levies if it was 20 hectares. Now that is a significant amount, but those 20 hectares creates approximately 250 housing units, or about an 8-year supply based on the projected growth rate. So that means that those offsite levies really net about $500,000 per year. So that effectively means that the town would get a $500,000 revenue stream off that levy, but they've got a $50 million debenture that they have to cover somehow. So effectively that gives you an annual return on that levy that would amount to 1% of the debenture that was outstanding. And that's a pretty impractical way to finance a project because you just simply can't afford to do it. So, and that only reflects the water treatment plant, not the sewer or the wastewater treatment, which is another $40 million. So there's a significant amount of infrastructure that is planned to be put in place, but the financing isn't going to work out well with the offsite levy program. So it has to be a little different philosophy in how we do this planning for these major infrastructure pieces over and above the offsite levy system. And so it just needs a bit of thought put into that. And I'm afraid it isn't being addressed in this, in the bylaw itself. So our lagging economy needs a certain amount of input or encouragement right now. And I think it'll be a better year coming forward because it looks like COVID is maybe going to leave us. And that's my prediction. And then along with that, I think we've seen the benefit of the flood mitigation, and there's going to be a pretty obvious awareness of that coming up this year, I think, and that should spur some, hopefully some good things for the community. So I would suggest a couple of considerations that we look at with regards to this bylaw, and that is that the council establish a working committee to deal with the offsite levy planning process and work with council, perhaps with developers and staff, to come up with a working plan on how to implement this future planning growth for the process. And then establish a philosophy of growth that supports development through planning and building and the building process. That I think is missing as well. And then if ultimately the council could also consider a phased payment for offsite levy that would be tied to lot sales, which would be a benefit to the development industry as such. So that's my thoughts for now. Thanks for your time.
Excellent points. Thanks very much, Les. Any questions from council for Mr. Rempel? I have no hands up, so
All right.
good to go. Thanks very much, Les.
Good. Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much. Okay.
Yep. Next, we have Jim Grandin with Dream Development speaking in opposition. Got you there, Jim?
Yes,
Gotcha. You bet. You go ahead. Are you ready, Jim?
sorry, I'm just, I happen to have the council meeting just start on me, so it threw off the timing here. So
No problem.
just getting used to this. Unfortunately, I have not caught any of the meeting up to this point, so I'm not sure what's been covered by others already. I did make the written submission that I presume you've seen. I could highlight it again, but it's very similar to our points of view that we expressed 2 years ago when the bylaw first came up. And I guess after some effort by administration with a workshop that many people attended and provided input on, it seems that we're probably in the same boat, and it appears maybe even in a bit of a worse place with the actual levies increasing since 2 years ago.
Jim, do you want to just highlight some of the points that you had in your letter? Do you want to do that, or?
I absolutely could do that, yes.
Sure.
So the first being that the whole levy report is driven by a calculation of what infrastructure is required as the town hits 50,000 people. So presumably there's certain things that get triggered before others, but the overall roster of projects is for a town of a population of 50,000. Based on recent growth rates, so that could take anywhere from 50 to 100 years to achieve. And so what our concern is that the number of projects and the costs for them are maybe out of proportion or out of the scale of what the town may actually see in terms of growth in a reasonable time frame. I mean, if it takes 100 years to trigger some of these improvements, and you've been collecting fees over that 100-year time frame, there's a life cycle of some of these improvements is less than that 100-year time frame. So it just seems like that is maybe out of scale to a reasonable amount to include in the levy calculation. Another item is that we've expressed before is that it appears that grants for certain improvements, some of them being water treatment and wastewater treatment, is sometimes receiving funding from other levels of government. Provincial rules, for example, might dictate certain treatment requirements, and the town would get a grant based on that, or some portion of it. And yet the offsite levies assume that the full cost is what's being covered in the levy. And so that greatly has it has a great impact on the total amount of levies that are being charged. And so if there's a grant, we would like to think that that grant would be reflected in an updated levy calculation at some point. Then just the overall observation is, if the levies are charged as proposed, there is a risk that you're not going to achieve the growth that that very report has examined or based itself on, because capital is mobile. It's going to go to other jurisdictions. So for example, we also happen to develop in Crossfield, and our levy has held steady there for quite a number of years at on the order of $26,000 a hectare, or pardon me, an acre, $26,000 an acre. Just to give you a comparison in terms of what it is in hectares, 66,826 per hectare, whereas the rate on this phased in approach for High River would be 200,000, just over 200,000 per hectare in 2023 for our southwest portion of the town. That's a huge difference. And so just for Dream to be able to justify developing in High River, it's no comparison. I mean, the cost difference is huge. And also it's going to be affecting the viability of existing developments. So I think the town council would need to consider the effect on the growth rate of the town with levies as proposed. Is there any follow-up questions?
Do we have any questions for Jim from council? Councillor Nychuk. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. Thanks for your comments, Jim. Much appreciated. Going to your just comparison about Crossfield and High River, some differences in population there, no?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely there is. And
their infrastructure requirements compared to ours to facilitate all that, just based on population size and what you need to require to facilitate that population. Comparing dollar to dollar on a offsite levy, do you think that's a fair comparison?
Well, I think the ISL report itself compares municipalities across the region around High River. And it so makes reference to that, and also makes reference to the need to be competitive with other jurisdictions in light of what's being proposed for High River. So it's not our concept, it's addressed right in the report itself as a consideration for administration and obviously town council to consider.
Yep, fair enough, thank you.
I don't have any other questions, Jim. So we'll let you go. Thank you very much for attending today and giving us your thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to at least present our point of view.
Absolutely. Yep. Thanks, Jim. Take care.
Take care.
Next, we have Blair from Lansdowne.
Is here. She may also take a chance to just highlight the
We're ready, Blair, if you are.
Oh, thank you. I was trying to follow along with the video there, so I appreciate the heads up.
That gets difficult.
It does. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak here today. I reached out and made a formal submission as well. One thing I just want to state is, while we're technically in opposition to the bylaw as it is, the opposition basically comes out of, we feel that we would like to have further stakeholder meetings and engagement. So I just want to clarify that point up front. So I've been with Lansdowne for under a year now as their Chief Operations Officer. I come from a background of consulting engineering and land development projects for the last 16 years in Southern Alberta. And through that time, I've been fortunate enough to be involved in some stakeholder meetings for offsite levy bylaw preparation and annual reviews. So I'm able to gain some other insights that municipalities have discovered and some challenges they've had going through this process. So Lansdowne and myself, we agree that having a bylaw to fund infrastructure that not only supports but attracts future investment is critical to any municipality. So going back to my point a moment ago, we're not opposed to an offset levy bylaw. It's mostly just the bylaw being in front of council right now as it is. So we feel that to establish a bylaw that everyone can support, it needs to be done through strong collaboration with the various stakeholders. And from what I understand, that process had started back a couple of years ago, and I think it was last addressed in the fall of 2019. But if we're able to re-engage that process and gain insights from industry, the town, all the various stakeholders, we should be able to arrive at one that we can all support and we can all use going forward that'll help the town with its initiatives and ensure that infrastructure is in place to support growth in a responsible manner. We find that offset levy bylaws can do one of two things. It can either deter development or it can be a way of promoting development. And really, it just comes, whichever one happens, it's a result of how the bylaw was put together and what it does. Because if we look at the bylaw as it is in front of us right now, there's some substantial increases. And I think, as I referenced in my letter, one of the concerns that we have is the growth projections. Looking at the growth projections as outlined in the background report, those are aggressive. And, I think we can all agree that to reach those numbers, we're going to, in theory, and a lot of projects would be needed. And we're putting a lot of these projects that have significant contingencies on top of them into the bylaw, and the number goes up substantially. So I've personally found that dealing with municipalities through the years, getting aggressive with growth projections ultimately slows down development, and it leaves the bylaw in a shortfall situation, because some projects are still going to be required, but it'll really deter development with inflating bylaws as much as we're talking about here. So we feel that, it's tough. It's tough to accurately represent reasonable growth. We understand that. But I guess from our perspective, is let's not go right to the nth degree here and assume aggressive growth here right out of the gate and really inflate the numbers as much as we're talking about. This proposal as it stands right now has the potential to add a cost right out of the gate of $9,000 or more per lot for land that Lansdowne owns in our existing Hamptons development, which is substantial. That is a huge cost that we'd be adding on to every project, every lot, and $9,000 to a potential homeowner right now is quite significant. So ultimately, that will slow sales and will in turn slow growth. One other item for us is we would like to know, and again, we would support further stakeholder engagement, because we would like to know how the previous comments were incorporated into the updated bylaw. Because in some instances, the town may have had to rethink things, and in some instances, the town may have considered it and have a rational response for how to deal with it. So we would just like to have that dialogue with town administration so that we can all collectively come back to council with a product that we feel can be backed by everyone. So in closing, I guess the town has significant potential. We're looking at significant investment in the area in the short term. And I feel that we all have a responsibility to work together to make sure that the town continue to grow and be competitive with other areas. So I guess it would be our recommendation that council decide to re-engage the stakeholder meetings and assign a timeline to that re-engagement to say that we would like to direct staff to go back, meet with the stakeholders, and from there have a draft bylaw that can go back in front of council, whether we want to say by spring or early summer. You could pick a date, but I just think that re-engagement would be key. So thanks for your time.
Excellent. Thanks, Blair. Any questions from council for Blair? I don't have any questions coming from council, Blair, so we'll let you go and you can continue to watch in if you wish, but we'll continue on. Thanks very much for being with us today, Blair.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. So we'll move on, and any questions from council on any of this? There are none. So I've got a couple of concerns that I'll bring up and maybe get Riley's thoughts or Kaylee's thoughts on them, but when I see all three of these individuals having the exact same concerns, it starts to put up red flags for me as to what we're doing. And I don't mind being aggressive on this, but and I'm not worried about what other communities are doing. We're High River, and this is us, and I'm not. We can look at comparisons. It's great information and everything else, but we are High River first. But as in my experience with being in here for 7+ years now, that lots of times what looks good on paper with what we're doing doesn't match up with reality quite so well sometimes. And so when I'm hearing the same consistency in concerns, like I said, it starts to raise some red flags for me. And a big one, as soon as I've always looked at that 50,000 number and going, man, that's a long way out there, boys and girls. That's a big, that's huge. That's 3.5 times the size of what we are right now. And I don't know, I definitely have concerns on using that number in these projections. With what Jim was talking about, the 200,000 compared to 66,000, well, excellent point, Michael, because, how do you build that into comparing apples to apples in these communities? It's difficult to do. So, but I think, this has been a long time coming, but what I don't want to do is do this just to get it done and make mistakes or have a plan that does not work for this community based on what we're hearing and the experience of these individuals. So I've just got a lot of questions leading into, second, third reading. So that's all I have to say on that. But I think I think we need to take a hard look, because I think this council's done an excellent job in being aggressive, and you know, we had to be that way after the flood. We had to foot to the floor. We had no choice. We had to get certain things done, and we're kind of used to doing that. But I don't know that it's the right approach at all times. So I just want to, and I have no problem at all if council agrees to pull the reins in on this a little bit and kind of rewind things. I know that'll make staff's head explode when I say that, but like I said, I'd rather, I'm kind of comparing it to the CMRB thing, where I would rather have a good plan at the end of the thing rather than something that's going to be rushed, like the way the Alberta government is rushing our growth plan with the CMRB. And it's not going to be the plan that we all dreamt about. But in here, we are in full control of this. So as well, we've, you know, our new CAO with Chris Prosser being on board. I'd like a little more conversations with his experience and standpoint on this. So that's where I'm going to leave my comments. If anybody else has any, please raise your hand. Councillor Kinghorn.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. I have to echo your comments, and that I would certainly support us a bit of a rewind here and really have a continued hard look. I know our staff put a lot of time and effort into this. I was in attendance at the open house that we had at the Memorial Center. The comments that were made today and that we've received are not dissimilar to everything that was discussed at that meeting. And I felt there were some good ideas or thoughts brought forward that could be incorporated into this bylaw. And I think that we could have a relook at it. And I agree with you, 50,000 people, that's a long time out from now, especially the way the rest of the province and the economy is going in Alberta. I would fully support sending it back and having a little more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kinghorn. Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. And I really appreciated all of the presentations, including even the written letters, because I totally back what they're saying. The 50,000 has always bothered me, even when we were discussing this previously. And I also was at that open house, and I was able to sit with Jim, and the expectation, of course, at council was that we were just totally there for observational purposes, no input. But not only through Jim, but all of the presenters at that workshop had such, in my mind, some reasonable requests, and also their willingness to work together in partnership and collaboration. So when I did read the report, I was a little bit disappointed because it seemed like nothing was put in. And it seemed then that was a lot of extra time on behalf of everyone, because I was very impressed with the developers taking the time to go to that meeting instead of just complaining about High River. They were there to be proactive. So I also would definitely support us reining this in and encourage proper stakeholder group meetings involving council. I think it's important, but to have, especially that we have a new CAO now, I think he should be part of the process. And I do respect the hard work that our team, the town team, has done, but I think this definitely needs to have a further look.
Thank you, Councillor McMillan. Councillor Cooey.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass, and thanks everyone, staff and developers, for your input. When I look back at my notes, every time we talk about offsite levies, some of those things that they brought up, I continue to have in my notes and circled and questioned, and I think some of them referenced it. I wonder if we're a little bit cart before the horse. We've often talked about growth and needing a plan, and we've joked about, do we even need to grow? Do we want to grow? Do we want to be 50,000 people in X amount of years? And can we make some of these plans without those conversations and those sorts of plans? And are we sending our staff down a bit of a rabbit hole without having the necessary tools or necessary information for our direction, how we want to go with growth? They've just set it out based on projections, based on consultation, but maybe that isn't where this community needs to or wants to be. And I think we do need to revisit how we're looking at this and how we are moving forward.
Well said. Councillor Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. Sorry to be the spoiler of all of this, because I appreciate all of these comments, but we're going outside the procedural boundaries of a public hearing in debating. And the point of this, it would be at the second reading of the bylaw to bring up all of these. And of course, if the second reading is defeated, then we go the direction that we want. But appreciated all of the comments from Les and Jim and Blair, and anybody else that was pro or for the bylaw.
Sorry, excellent points. Councillor Moore is bang on 100% correct. We are going to move on now. And we'll deal with this when it comes back to us for second and third reading. So no further questions for staff. I hereby declare this public hearing relating to bylaw 4586/2020 closed at 3:46 p.m. Move on to item 6.1 being the strat priorities chart and work program update. I'll let Chris speak to this.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. As council was aware, we had our strategic quarterly meeting on December the 8th, where we went through council's strategic priorities that we set back in January of 2020. There have been just some minor changes. COVID still remains a kind of a little bit of a hurdle in progress to a certain extent. It slowed it down, that's for sure. But our top 5 priorities remain the same, including the long-term water strategy, which now a draft agreement is at the county side. We just received comments back from the county this morning and are going to be circulating those for review this week and set up for a meeting next week with county staff to work through some of the issues that they've identified. The business case for the new aquatic center or addition to the rec center will be coming forward at the end of this month. And we will hopefully have clear direction from council to move forward to some kind of plebiscite or referendum later this fall as part of the election. The pedestrian bridge study has been submitted for funding request to Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We expect an answer by March 2021. It is oversubscribed. Want to make everybody aware of that. And we hope that we will get some funding to see that move forward in connection with our active transportation kind of network planning as well. The new website is well underway and it's in staff's hands to get some of the information uploaded to them, but we are targeting launch for February 2021. The beta version that we saw just before Christmas was very impressive, and we were working through some additional information with them as well on updating some of our graphics as well. And then our events, we are hoping to have a revised events policy to a committee of the whole at the end of January. That will break out our special events from a public ground policy into film, street vendors and sidewalk cafes, as well as special events from that perspective, and better and clearer role clarity for what the responsibility of the town is, what the responsibility of event organizers are, and outlining what our role in all events will be. So based upon that, the rationale for the recommendation to adopt the new chart is at the basis of that. And council has 3 options before them right now to either support the proposed recommendation, defeat the proposed recommendation, or refer this to committee of the whole for further discussion. Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. That's all I have. You're on mute, Mayor.
I'm always on mute. It's the best place I can be. Questions from councillors? Are there any? Ask for a motion from Councillor Kinghorn. Council adopt the updated strategic priorities chart and work program as presented.
I'll give you that motion, Mayor.
All in favor? Questions? Motion carried. Thanks very much, Chris. So we'll move on to item 7.1 being the council procedure bylaw. Kara?
So good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to be presenting the proposed council procedure bylaw for adoption today. The proposed bylaw formalizes the existing practices with a couple of additional recommendations in the bylaw around consent agendas, the inclusion of a question period, and the establishment of council correspondence and delegation procedures. The previous council procedure bylaw was adopted in 2011 and has had multiple amendments to it. The existing bylaw does not align with existing practice, nor is it in alignment with standard practice across the province. If council supports the proposed recommendation, administration will arrange for the bylaw to be executed and posted on the town's website, and for communication to go out regarding the new processes around council correspondence and delegations and the like. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Kara. Councillor Kinghorn.
Thank you, Mayor. To Kara, question around the way I think it was phrased, questions during the council meeting. Can you explain a little better how you plan that to work? Like right now we do questions before the meeting and we do questions and comments after the meeting. Go ahead.
Are you talking about question period?
No, there was a comment in there during the meeting.
So
there's comments during the meeting, not before. Like right now, we limit it to before the meeting and after the meeting.
So it would be still before and after the meeting only.
Only, not during. Okay, thank you.
For the public questions, right, Jamie?
Correct.
Okay. Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Kira. And thank you, Councillor Kinghorn, because I was confused about that too, because I thought it kind of made it sound like questions could be asked on an ongoing basis. So my question is regarding on page 243, the other attachments for information. What's in the perusal basket? Is that like an inbox, or I just kind of wonder.
So that's the old bylaw.
Oh, okay. So what did that mean? Was that like the inbox, like stuff that came in?
Yes, so like correspondence and things that came in, but it wasn't a really formal process around it. And so, yeah, we haven't included that kind of language in the new bylaw.
Perfect. It sounded so exotic. I just kind of wondered. So.
Councillor Cooey.
Sorry, I was trying to find the spot because my question too was about public comments, and I should have written down the page, but maybe Kara can help me because I read it that they were only going to occur at the beginning of the meeting. So can we, Kara, sorry, do we know where it is? So we can have a reread of it?
No problem. So there's a public comment section and then there's a question period section. So I don't want to, the two are very different. So public comments is in relation to items that are on the agenda. Question period would allow, because what we have seen when we've been meeting in person is you have had the odd person who wants to ask a question that's not specifically on the agenda. And that would allow for them to ask a question in that regard at the end of the meeting.
Okay, I did find it, and it said members of the public shall be offered the opportunity to make comments during the public comments section on the regular council agenda. So I guess it wasn't clear to me that it was going to occur both at the end and the beginning of the meeting. And I just wanted to make sure we weren't losing that element of it.
Okay, thank you. I just want to find the question period section.
It's maybe 210-ish.
Okay, so there's
210.
So there's the part around question period that would actually be labeled separately at the end of the meeting versus public comments, which would be labeled at the front end of the meeting.
But we've had public comments both. Correct me if I'm wrong. We have not been in person in a very long time. We would allow public comments both at the beginning and again at the end?
If that's what council wishes. So the intention of this bylaw is to allow a lot more flexibility, not as much of a rigid structure in terms of these things shall be on the agenda. But really, so if that's where council wants us to go in terms of back to that, and when we meet back in person, that is probably what we would do. But as of right now, we have not been doing that because everything's been in writing. So I guess I don't feel like I'm answering your question. Let me just I just want to find this section. Sorry.
211. That's okay. I guess I'm thinking of it more as in person, and maybe I should be thinking of it in this sort of format. Is if that's our intention, to think of it meeting virtually versus. And I get not wanting to write it in stone. Like I said, I just think it's important that people have that opportunity to express their concerns at the beginning of the meeting, and then again after they've heard the conversation. That's all. So.
Right. So I just pulled up the language again around public comments. It does not set it in stone. So if council wants it set in stone, we can certainly make that amendment. But it's more been left to be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, I'm on board with treating this bylaw as though we are in person, number one. And secondly, that we have public comments prior to the meeting and at the end of the meeting. We've experienced that. And as long as Mary Campbell's around, then it's always entertaining, but that they can speak to something that's on the agenda, listen to the conversation, and then be able to speak afterwards if it's really important, without it turning into a public hearing or anything like that, of course. But it's public meetings and they should have a voice where needed. Councillor Kinghorn.
Thank you, Mayor, and to Kara again. And you mentioned questions. It's still specific to the agenda of the day, correct?
So for public comments would be specific to the agenda. When I'm talking about question period, that would be more broader. So if somebody they wanted to ask council a question about, I don't know, the Annabelle bylaw during this particular meeting, they would be able to use that as an avenue to ask more of those general questions, should they wish to do so.
So that's the big addition on this part of it.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and that would be on any subject that they want to bring up.
Correct.
In council. Okay.
Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. Now, I'm just trying to find this. Like, I'm on page 211, and I see where it says Part 5, Committee of the Whole Meeting Procedures, and it brings up question and answer period, and it's specifically on 141. During the question and answer period of a Committee of the Whole meeting, Committee of the Whole members may make an inquiry to the CAO. But then when I go down to Part 6, Council Meeting Procedures, I see public comments, but I don't see anything about a question period. I just see it very much the same way we do it now, where it's has to be 5 minutes, and it must address items contained within the current agenda. So where is this part that about question period in the council meeting then?
So thank you for clarifying that, Councillor McMillan, because I think what Councillor Cooey is referring to is the part that is in relation to Committee of the Whole. Sorry, and I was speaking in relation to the council meeting. So that specific part on page 211 is specific to Committee of the Whole meeting. So let me just pull up. So public comments is section 144 of the bylaw. And I apologize, I don't have the agenda reference directly here. And then question period is in 166 of the bylaw. And so these are specific to council meetings, whereas that other section is specific to Committee of the Whole. And the fact that there's an opportunity for council to ask those questions as part of Committee of the Whole. So this bylaw speaks to both council and Committee of the Whole, and how we're going to govern kind of both of those different types of meetings. So I apologize, I wasn't clear on that.
Thank you.
Councillor Neitzer.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. So to mire this some more, muddy the waters, question period and public comment, Kara, the same or different, and where do they both fall?
So different. So public comments are in relation to items on the agenda. Question period would be, like I shared before, in that if somebody has a more general question, they could ask that of council during that period. That's not specifically tied to an item on the agenda.
Yeah, but at what point does somebody get to speak up? Does question period follow public comment, or does question period start and then public comment follow? There needs to be a spot for that to happen, right? So we don't have question period throughout a meeting, and ultimately that just leads to disruption, right?
Right. No, absolutely. So that would be at the end of the meeting.
At the end of the meeting. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, no further questions that I have, so I will ask for a motion from Councillor Moore. The council give first reading to bylaw 4590/2021, and the council give second reading to the bylaw 4590/2021, and the council, all council present give unanimous consent to proceed with third and final reading of bylaw 4590/2021.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. I will make that motion.
Thank you very much. All in favor? Further questions? Carried. As for a motion from Councillor McMillan that council give third and final reading to bylaw 4590/2021, being the council procedure bylaw.
I'll give you that motion.
Thank you. All in favor? Motion carries. Thanks very much, Kara. On to the bursary program policy.
Perfect. So good afternoon again, Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to be presenting the proposed community bursary program policy for adoption today. The proposed policy establishes criteria, a clear procedure, and framework on how bursaries will be distributed to high school youth in High River. The existing awards and recognition policy is outdated and does not align with the town's existing practices or standard practice again across the province. If council supports the proposed recommendation, administration will arrange for the policy and associated documents to be signed and posted on the town's website, and for the policy and application form to be shared with the schools. We will also arrange for the old policy to be removed from the website. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Councillor Cooey.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass, and thanks, Kara. The only thing I saw with it, Kara, we have a contact name and email address that is specific to a staff member, and that staff member could change. So does that mean that this policy has to come back for revision? Or is there any benefit, and I don't even know if we could have a general email address that is bursaries@highriver.ca, so then it's always up to date and doesn't need to be changed?
So thank you so much for that question. So that contact information is actually on the application form, and it was in consultation with the schools, and because I had agreed, I thought maybe there was maybe a more general email address, but they asked for those specific individuals. And I think that we would certainly have the flexibility to update the contact information on the application form.
Because it's just on the application.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. I didn't catch that. Thank you.
Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. And thanks again, Kara. And you've done a really great job with this policy. My one concern is regarding on the program application. So on page 286, when we've got the information about the youth, one of the questions is High River residency, and it's like from and to. And I'm just wondering what bearing this has, because you could have a youth that moves here, and let's say they've only lived here a year, but they're an outstanding citizen and they're involved with community and their marks are just wonderful. I'm just wondering, do we really need this as a, I could see maybe a year up, but I'm just kind of thinking that, should someone who's been here, let's say only a year, not be considered versus someone who's happened to be born and raised here, like when we're just thinking about that whole, capturing everyone. So I just like your feedback on that, please.
So I don't think it's meant to be, you know, like to prevent somebody from applying or for being the successful applicant. I think all things being considered, let's say you have two applications that are they're very qualified and, you know, ultimately these can be very difficult decisions. And obviously it's going to be the school making the recommendation, that they'll have that information. It's more meant to be just general information. It's not meant to be, and, you know, stop dead criteria in terms of whether they're going to actually get the application. That criteria is spelled out in the policy itself in terms of what, you know, what they would need to meet in order to be recommended for approval to council. But if council is comfortable or not comfortable with that piece, we can certainly take that out of the application. It's not going to be a deal breaker.
I'd be curious to hear from other council members just about that. Like, I know it's not like you said, it's not a deal breaker, but I'm just kind of curious about that.
Anybody that wants to speak directly to that? Councillor Nychuk? You're next on the list.
So you're not speaking directly to that. I've got another question, please.
I guess then if no one's speaking to it, does anyone have a problem if it just has High River residency or like we'd know by an address, right? Like,
Yeah, I don't think it needs a timeline on it. You want to jump in day one, come on over.
thank you.
Councillor Nychuk?
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. I guess related on the other side of that residency, but what about a student that might not be in the financial position to immediately jump into post-secondary education upon their graduation? Costs a lot of money to go to school. Some students have to work for a year or sometimes more to bankroll themselves because unfortunately they don't have the means. Their parents, their family, they're you know, whatever, unable to get a loan, whatever the situation might be. I don't know how we would include it, but if we had that type of a student that wouldn't apply because they see the qualifications and they say, well, I'm not going to school next year. I've already got my job and I know I have to work for a year to fund myself to get to school. The way it's written right now, discludes that type of applicant. I would hate for us to eliminate somebody that was in that kind of financial position, you know, because of that. Is there a way we can frame it so that if there's a student that is doing that is taking a hiatus for, I'm not sure what that period of time, what we might consider or put into policy, but can we investigate that?
Certainly. So I think one of the things is that if, you know, let's say, you know, that an individual is planning to do that, they could certainly put that in there as part of their application, right? So I'm going to use an individual who just came forward for his funds. He was awarded those funds not this year, but the year previously, and it's just collecting upon them now. And so really, what it would be on the town side is we wouldn't release those funds until they provide us with proof of enrollment, which actually wouldn't change like how we would administer the policy, just as long as, you know, so if they put that in their application that their plan is to work for a year in order to go to school for whatever it is, and they're ultimately chosen as being the successful recipient, we would certainly work with them.
Well, I'm not going to dive into where I read it, but my interpretation and reading of it was kind of quite clear that it seemed that you had to be attending the following year upon your graduation. Okay. Can we revisit that language so that it, Absolutely. You know, it is more open? I'd appreciate that anyway. I don't know if any of the other counselors think the same way, but I sure would want to exclude anybody. So,
I agree. Yeah, good point, Michael. Councillor Masterman.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass, and Councillor Nychak. I appreciate where you're coming from on that. I sure wouldn't want to be the one administering this thing if we're unless we're putting a time limit, like they must go within a year. But I could just see this turning into a bit of a logistical nightmare if somebody, is not collecting for 5 years or something. And but anyway, that's for better minds than mine to come up with how that would work. But I really like this policy. I like the fact that the criteria goes beyond academic achievements, which is basically the main thing we had to work with before. I also like the fact that the schools themselves or the school divisions will be given this policy, and using that policy will be coming up with one name, possibly two to split it. But I certainly didn't like what we had to do at least once before, where we were given several names and had to decide who got it. But my very specific question is, under the submissions of the application, and this appears in different places in this document, including on page 280 of the agenda, under section C, subsection 4, it says the completed or the application must include a description of how the post-secondary program that the youth is entering will benefit High River. And I think I like the intent of that, but I know if I was thinking, I'm out of here, I ain't going back to High River. Like that might just sway my decision as to whether I was going to apply, because I might think, well, I don't have a hope in heck, because I can't really show how it's going to benefit High River, because I'm going to be in the Silicon Valley, or I'm going to be in, somewhere else. Like, so I'm just kind of wondering what the thinking is on that, Kara. I'm not dead against it. I just have concerns that it might limit the applicants.
Okay, no, and that's absolutely a fair comment. So thank you for sharing that. I think the goal was that, often people do go away to school and they might bring their roots back to High River. And so thinking about what is that long-term impact, perhaps it's something that, like if council's doesn't want to make it High River specific, we just wanted to really focus on what's the benefit to this community, but we could make the language a little broader to be, how will you incorporate that into the, the benefit of, I don't know, whatever community you're residing in. But we wanted to make it more specific to High River, because the funds are ultimately coming from High River.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I think making it broader, I like Bruce's comments. I think making it a little bit broader, who are we to say you got to be doing it for here? It's your life. You win the scholarship, you take your money, you do your thing, and somebody benefits from it. Hopefully, if you're a good guy.
If I could just add to my comment, Mayor, sorry to butt in, but
go ahead.
Even if it said something like a description of how the post-secondary program that the youth is entering will benefit society, or something like that, will benefit, will be a benefit, without saying High River. Thanks.
Leave it open. Yeah. No further questions, so I'll ask for a motion from Councillor Masterman. The council adopt the community bursary program policy, and I'll add in there with the minor amendments we have spoken about today. And the council rescind the awards and recognition policy POL 1810100.
I'd be happy to make that motion, Mayor Snodgrass. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor? Motion carries. Thanks, Kara. Gathering places. Janelle?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the Gathering Places item before you this afternoon. This is a really exciting initiative, and it's part of our agreement with the Canadian Red Cross that started over 3.5 years ago that was entitled the Community Capacity Building Initiative. There's a whole detailed history of these particular funds and the agreement that's in the request for decision in front of you. So please keep in mind this is a simplified version. But the Community Capacity Building Initiative contained 4 parts as part of the Rural Response Plan. These included some pretty fantastic things, including the design and training of emotional safe spots, the implementation of an affordable counseling program that we know as Foothills Community Counseling, funding for local organizations, and of course, a focus on community connections throughout High River. So the work that's been done to date is something that all High River residents should feel really, really proud of. There's been some phenomenal things come out of these funds. But as part of the final phase of the initiative, the remaining funds have been made available in the amount of $150,000, and that's to enhance existing outdoor spaces. So we're calling this project the Gathering Places. So this work is built off of the concept of social architecture. If you're unfamiliar with that term, it's simply the conscious design of an environment that promotes positive social interactions. So when this is done really thoughtfully, these spaces actually end up resulting in stronger community connections that in turn not only benefit the collective, but it's also known to increase personal health and well-being. So in an effort to select some unique and impactful projects for the Gathering Places initiative, a couple of things took place. First off, a small group of town employees got together to brainstorm an initial list of gathering place ideas. These ideas were eventually compiled into a staff survey where we received 71 responses. And what was really cool about that is we actually received an additional 20 ideas. So it was a real treat to get to see some of the incredible community building ideas that town staff were not only able to come up with, but they were really quite passionate about. So these ideas have been further distilled, grouped together, and evaluated against some really important criteria. The most important being that any products or materials that are needed for any one of these ideas needs to be purchased prior to March 31st, 2021. So other factors that we looked at were feasibility, cost, preference, as well as availability of town resources. So based on that, 7 exciting projects have emerged, and they are in front of you in your package today. They include lighting up of alleyways and Pioneer Square in our downtown core, the purchase of community benches that include swing benches and Wi-Fi benches, which is a really neat initiative, the planting of an edible food forest, the purchase and installation of a dock at Emerson Lake, enhancements to our very beautiful library patio, some necessary enhancements that include some garbage cans, some signage, and some seating at the bike jumps in the Northwest, and potentially a gazebo and additional landscaping in our Memorial Park in the Northwest to create a connection garden. So you will notice in your package that each of these projects has been assigned a budget. It's our intention to work with this dollar amount to offer as much value as possible towards each project. An example I can give you is the Emerson Lake Dock has $20,000 assigned to it. So what the intent would be is that we would purchase the dock, say that dock was $15,000, we would have that additional $5,000. That might be able to purchase us an additional bench within that area, or we may reallocate those dollars to some of the other 7 projects, depending. The main purpose is to spend the $150,000. I did want to point out an error in the request for decision. I've accidentally mixed up the allocated budgets for the Memorial Park Connection Garden and the edible food forest. They've been reversed. So the food forest should have a budget of $15,000 and the Connection Garden should have a budget of $25,000. So these projects were intentionally selected so as to incorporate each quadrant of the community. They were selected to encourage recreation, connection with nature, enhancement of our existing spaces rather than creating new spaces, and to, of course, offer up opportunities for connection and connectivity. The approved projects will be worked on concurrently with an installation goal of the end of 2021. And this is different than our purchasing deadline of March 31st, 2021, which is stipulated by the agreement with the Canadian Red Cross. So the recommendation in front of council today is that council direct administration to distribute the $150,000 budget towards the identified gathering place projects until all those allocated dollars have been spent. Thank you to Shelley Coote, who is also here with us to speak to the project and background if needed. So can I help answer any questions from Mayor and Council today?
Thanks, Janelle. Very well done. Councillor Masterman.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass, and thanks, Janelle, for it's a very, very exciting project, and I love it when staff present something like this, and the passion just comes through, because it's hard to not get excited when you guys are excited about something. So just a couple of quick things. I'm wondering whether each site would have some kind of signage acknowledging the Red Cross's contribution and that this is part of a blah, blah, blah program. You know, it's not absolutely imperative, I guess, to acknowledge these things, but things like, the edible forest, if it was just there and nobody really knew except for the few people who know about it, then, I know the same thing happened downtown when somebody on Facebook said, can you eat these things that are, grown downtown? And so it'd just be nice if people knew, that this actually came from Red Cross money that came after the flood. And obviously the participation of the town of High River as well. And I really don't want to get into micromanaging any of these things, but I know when we were polled as council some weeks ago about some of these all these projects, I don't really know what the answer is, but I'm a little bit concerned about the dock at Emerson Lake and how you would kind of ensure that no one group, anglers, for example, would kind of hog it, and there could be some conflicts that arise. And on the other hand, if you said it was only for anglers with mobility issues who can't really work along the shoreline, then that gets into a safety issue as well. So I guess I just, I'm sure you're on top of all this, but if you have any comments on that, on those two things, the signage and the docking area. Thanks, Janelle.
Thanks, Councillor Masterman. To address the comment about the signage, certainly signage could be considered. One thing that we had thought about, and I believe it's listed in the communications section of the request for decision, but that is to create a map of all the gathering places. So this would not necessarily only be the gathering places as part of this initiative, but anywhere within the community where you can come and take part in that social architecture. Of course, this gets a little bit complicated with COVID-19. However, we do want to encourage those outdoor activities, and one day a return to normal where we would really encourage these spaces to be used for connection. So as part of that map, we would want to make available not only a paper version, but a digital version as well. And of course, thanking the Red Cross as part of that communication that went out. When it comes to Emerson Lake Dock, every project will be part of a project plan. And so we'll kind of separate them out, and we will take into consideration who's utilizing that space. I know I've specifically heard a lot from the Mini Sailboat Association that comes down and uses Emerson Lake, my goodness, from spring right through fall, basically until it freezes. and they've been very, they would love to see a dock come and be utilized in that space. And so I know we've got quite a few user groups who will have to work with the intention of the Gathering Places initiative and take their turns.
Okay, thanks, Janelle.
Councilor McMillan?
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. Thank you very much for your presentation, Janelle. And I mirror Councillor Masterman's. It's always nice to hear the enthusiasm. I have a couple of questions. In regards to the dock, has there been a location thought about specifically?
Just the location that I would have proposed, and that is, I would say that is on the west side. It's kind of got a natural slope in. It's more shallow than some of the other areas around Emerson Lake, but of course we would refer to people who have far more experience with the lake itself, Parks and Recreation operations, to ensure that we're putting the dock in the best place.
Because the reason why I'm asking that question is thinking that it would be horrible to put it in front of the toboggan hill, because of course that would be a safety factor. I'm very happy about the Pioneer Square. I think that would be pretty exciting to utilize that space. And then my other question is, do you know exactly how much those Wi-Fi mobile charging chairs are, or stations?
The benches, I certainly do. We've contacted 3 different companies. They're all European countries. So if you happen to know of any companies offering solar Wi-Fi benches that are Canadian or even North American, please send them our way. But we have vetted some of these companies, and their products have been used in North America, specifically in Edmonton. And they range in price anywhere from $3,000 a bench all the way up to $7,500 a bench. Or sorry, my apologies, $10,000 a bench, depending on the aesthetics of it, how large it is, how many people it can seat. And so there's quite a number of options. We do have our eyes on a couple, but again, that would be part of those project plans that would go through a bit of a circulation process. So it's not simply my preference versus the town's preference.
Right. No, I think they're great, and the edible food forest, because that's so good to have that vacant lot utilized. So thanks to you and Shelley and everyone who was involved for doing this.
Councillor Cooey?
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass, and thanks, Janelle. These are all really exciting. So echo the comments of the other councillors. Just a point of clarification, I just so it's not confusing. In the list that you read versus the listing down below, the only item that isn't included is the food truck village. So just point of clarification, is that kind of next on the list if we have additional funds, or just for clarification for anybody that's out there listening and for me?
My apologies. I had intended to remove that appendix that I believe council is what you're looking at. Upon further thought, the food truck village was a high contender in terms of all of our feasibility, timelines, cost, preference. It came out really high in terms of preference, but it didn't quite rank so high in some of the other categories. And so in order for us to be really diligent with these funds and get them spent before the March 31st deadline, unfortunately, the food truck village just didn't make the cut. So it is something on the horizon. We have kept all of the ideas that were brought about by the survey and town staff contributions. And so certainly in the future, we're hoping.
Thanks, Janelle. I appreciate all the work that you guys have all put into this.
Councillor Kinghorn?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, great work, Janelle. You guys did an amazing amount of work on this, and I'm excited for most of it. I think the Pioneer Park is excellent. I think the patio work is great. The bike jumps are all good. I'm just a little concerned about the dock and putting the dock out onto Emerson Lake and what burden that's going to put on the town going forward. I understand that they're going to pay up front for this, but I think that there's a cost that'll come from that in future years. So I'm a little concerned about that one. The edible forest as well. I look at that lot and sorry, Councillor McMillan, I thought we'd sell it someday and take that money and put it into the park downtown or something like that, as opposed to spreading our resources out. And let's not forget, I appreciate Red Cross's position on this, but Red Cross got their money from donations from around the world to High River. And I think we should recognize that people did donate to the town of High River and through the Red Cross. And I think that's an important part of that awareness as well. Thank you.
Councillor Masterman.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. Sorry, I just thought of something based on what Councillor Kinghorn said in relation to the dock. Anybody who's ever seen a dock on lakefront property will tell you that every single goose and duck will be on that dock and pooping on it. And then people are going to want us to clean it. So it just is a fact of life. So so maintenance, we've got to be prepared to try to keep it clean or hope for a lot of rain. Thanks.
I'll drop the scrub brush off at your house.
That'd be good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. I will ask Councillor Cooey for a motion that council direct administration to distribute the $150,000 budget towards the identified gathering place projects until all allocated dollars have been spent.
I will happily give you that motion and look forward to enjoying these spaces.
All in favor? Motion's carried. Very well done, Janelle. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Property tax auction, Ray.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. You've seen a list similar to this before, and actually a portion of this list was provided back in June. It was a longer list, including other properties that had homes as well, but this list is for mobile homes only. The request is simple. We need council to set sale conditions and reserve bids, and I can answer any questions.
Sorry, Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Ray. And I know I ask this each time, but are these lived in? Like, because I always have a problem with the whole concept of, like, first of all, do we know why the taxes haven't been paid? Is it just people just refusing to pay, or is it because they're no one's living there and it's?
I couldn't say for sure that these are occupied. There could be some vacant properties, but these are trailers, so it's not likely that somebody's going to have a trailer and not being occupied. There could be a renter, right? We're not sure of that if it's an owner occupant. I highly doubt that any of these are coming to sale as a statement of non-payment for some reason, like they just refusing for other reasons other than financial distress, that they just don't have the cash to pay. This is usually a last resort is when we're moving forward with the sale. We haven't been able to make arrangements in any other fashion or an agreement, and this is our last chance for the municipality to recapture the property taxes that are due. So it's stated in the report, just to make sure it's clear that any residual amounts left over after the taxes have been paid, then that is provided to the owner, so that they receive the net proceeds from the sales.
Because I guess my concern is always based around if there's a rental occupant that then they're basically evicted.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, I just don't like that, because homelessness and whatnot, and because I'm gathering it is through financial distress, but I just think that if it's a landlord situation, that it really is a shame for the rental occupant to be penalized and lose their home based on the landlord not paying the property tax. So
Yeah.
That's just where I'm coming from.
There could be circumstances where a new owner doesn't want to live in it themselves and would like to keep it as a rental income and then leave a tenant in place. But that's not up to the municipality. That would be up to the new owner.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Masterman.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. And Ray, I think I ask you this every single time. Of the 5 properties, how many do you think might end up paying before 10 o'clock on March 5th?
Using past experience, we'll have likely all of them will pay prior to the very deadline. Often it never comes to the final sale, but then funds are found or a loan is able to be made, and those tax arrears are paid up to date. But rarely it does happen that the auctions do take place and sales happen. But in my experience, the funds do appear.
Okay, and people aren't evicted.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much.
Okay, I'll ask for a motion from Councillor Moore that council adopt the reserve bids and conditions of sale for the 5 properties as set out in the report to council on January 11th, 2021.
I will make that motion, Mayor Snodgrass.
Thank you. All in favor? It is carried. Thanks very much, Ray.
Thank you.
Financial management framework. Chris.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. As council's probably being aware, we've circulated these policies for almost a year now, and it was time to bring them back for formal adoption from that perspective. So the recommendation that's before you today is to adopt these 2 policies, one, the financial management framework and the capital priorities policy. Both these policies are new policy direction for the town, but it kind of outlines our overall principles when we've done the budget, as well as dealing with capital priorities over the last, actually several years, actually. It's the ingrained policy from that perspective. Organizationally, there's really no substantial impact besides the fact it provides clear direction to staff on how to follow through on the financial framework, as well as setting capital priorities for the capital planning process. While there's no direct financial impact on these policies, there will be a financial impact down the road as we do asset management and as we use these policies as a guide to set our fiscal priorities. The whole intent of the proposed recommendation that's before you today is to introduce new policy, and this is consistent with that approach. It is consistent with council's adopted policies as it relates to decision-making guidelines, as well as the roles and responsibilities policies that were adopted last February. In principle, these policies adopt some principles. In particular, the financial management framework is kind of the key one that identifies kind of 5 key principles of resilience, flexibility, fairness, value, and transparent. And it kind of lines up well with the conversation we heard about offsite levies today a little bit. You know, we need to make sure that we are resilient in our financial and financial planning framework and be able to adapt to opportunities that come before us or challenges, just like the flood was a challenge that the community faced. We need to be taking a look at being flexible, be able to move around and being nimble to address our financial needs as needs arise and new information comes available. Part of that is, you know, the mention of grant opportunities as well. We need to take a serious look at reducing our reliance on grant opportunities from federal upper levels of government. The trend is to see those levels of those grants disappear over time and be self-sustaining on our own from that perspective. Part of this process too is to look at fairness. What does the future look like? What should current taxpayers pay for in the future versus what the future taxpayers should pay for as well? Every financial decision we make overlaps multi-generations. It's not just this generation, it's going to be the next generation as well. We set that tone through this policy. We need to make sure our user fees and our tax rates are fair and representative of what service we provide. And that's going through that level of service review on an annual basis and making sure that we are actually costing out what it costs to deliver that service. And if we are not, either increasing levels of service and increasing taxes, or decreasing levels of service and decreasing taxes. We need to make sure that we provide value to our taxpayers. It is a public resource. Our taxpayer money that we receive and our user fees is taxpayer resourced. It comes from one source of revenue and only one source of revenue. And we need to make sure that that approach is consistent over time, each and every year, and the quality doesn't change from year to year. And we need to make sure that we're always asking them what they expect. Those decisions that we make the decisions that we make financially could affect the levels of service on so many different services we have within this community. And, one of the big ones we'll be talking about in the upcoming months is a new aquatic facility of some kind. The other key is to be transparent. We need to be open and transparent with our taxpayers. Just like a shareholder of a company, they're a shareholder within this community, and they need to be fully informed and provide that opportunity. Now, we do know that people don't like to be talking about finances, and finance is very boring to talk about. Let's be clear. It's not the most enjoyable piece, but we need to find ways to communicate with them and be effective in that communication so that they understand and are given the information. We may not be able to encourage them to come out to open houses and those types of things, but we need to be transparent from that perspective. The capital priorities policy aligns directly with our decision-making guidelines. As council may recall, we did in our decision-making guidelines have a format there that outlines how we set priorities: urgency criteria, essential criteria, and strategic criteria. This policy, the capital priorities policy, will allow us to make sure that we can measure things either that they're strategic or simply a reaction to a complaint, or that they're an opportunity that may not align with existing strategic priorities. And they may change our direction from that perspective because there is an opportunity before us. With that capital priorities policy framework, there's two assessment processes. One that's an overall assessment and one that's critical. One that takes a look at the critical criteria, life safety, damage to property, those types of criteria to make sure that we're fully informed when we're making those decisions. This will help us support our long-term capital plan, and it will also make it easier for staff and for council when wrestling with capital priorities on an annual basis. Overall, these principles have been in every community. These principles have been utilized informally historically, and I think just formalizing in this format allows the public to see them and grasp them and read them and understand where we're going. Council has three options before you this afternoon. One, to adopt the proposed recommendation as presented, to not adopt the proposed policies and defeat the recommendation, or to refer these back to committee of the whole again for further discussion and reassessment. Based upon that, Mr. Mayor, that's the rationale for the recommendation.
Close.
Close.
Good man. One question, Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. And actually, I have a few questions, so please bear with me. One, and thanks very much, Chris, for your work towards developing policies and streamlining a process. My first comment is it's just me being the editor, but in the recommendation, the first part says capital priority process policy. So it should only have one process. On page, it's 7 of 18 of yours, but 305 for us. Under C number 3 about public facility user fees with the policy statement, I'm just wondering, does this mean outdoors too or just indoors? So what I'm bringing up is, for example, what if a nonprofit group was having an event at George Lane Park? Are they going to be charged, or is this strictly for indoor?
Well, this would apply to anything that we may have a fee bylaw that charges a fee. So if we do charge a fee for George Lane Park, which for some reason my mind's gone blank on the fee bylaw, I don't think we do. But if we did introduce something, then that would be something that we would apply from that perspective. So it doesn't necessarily say that we have that fee right now or that kind of taxpayer rate, but it does say that philosophically, if we support not-for-profits, that we will take a look on a case-by-case basis to waive their fees associated with use of some of our facilities. And that potentially could include outdoor park spaces.
Thank you for clarification. And then on page 306 regarding debt, just got to get my screen. The policy statement number 1, what's major vertical infrastructure?
So vertical infrastructure is buildings.
Oh, okay.
So linear infrastructure is the underground and the roads.
Perfect. And bear with me with my ignorance, but it's just I always like to have clarification. On page 307, there is a typo under unconditional grants, the 5th line. They are actually, it should say required, not require. And I know that sounds nitpicky, but might as well get it all clean. And then
without conditions.
Under page 311, capital priority process, I think this is quite a good process. I actually wish we had this process in line when we were making our strategic priorities, because I think it would have streamlined things quite effectively. But because this is quite a new process for staff as well as us as council, I'm just kind of wondering, are you going to have a bit of an in-service for staff and council to see how this actually works? Because one thing when I was going through, and it could be just me, but I kind of got lost around 5.4, 5.6, and with just how is this actually working? So I just thought it might be helpful to have a bit of an educational component.
Yeah, and you don't, to be clear, Councillor McMillan, you don't necessarily apply it to every criteria to every single project. We did use this through our budget process on the capital side of things when we got to the nitty-gritty amongst the staff level this fall. When we got to debating projects, we went through a criteria of how to reduce the number of projects, because the number of projects that was presented to council was greatly reduced than what staff wanted to do. So we went through this process to kind of weed them out to say, okay, what's a priority, what's strategic in nature, what's an opportunity, and it worked. And once people started seeing that it does work, it allows us to focus our attention a lot better. And so there will be an in-service with staff as we get through this process and outline how to use this decision-making criteria and how to apply it. Because you don't necessarily have to apply all 4 different criteria at the same time. You may only focus on the critical, the public safety aspect of things, right? So the situational critical assessment, or you may have a conversation about the political assessment, political nature of it, if it's to do with a grant. So there's different ways to use it and different ways to apply it. It is flexible in nature. You don't have to use it concretely every single way all the time. It's there to adapt and to give you some way to break ties. Everybody's going to have their emotional connection to a project that they bring forward, be at the staff level or at the council level. But when we put this through this lens, it gives us, that perspective that levels the playing field, so to speak. This is directly out of our decision-making guidelines and kind of hybridized from that perspective of how we make strategic priorities. And so I think it will be a good tool. And I've used it for the last probably 20 years, this kind of criteria to help with capital plans, especially when we got to the final priorities. It's helped us also set up offsite levy programs as well on prioritizing projects within that. What's important, what's not important, what's imperative, what is a critical piece of infrastructure that needs to be replaced, what's not critical that needs to be replaced. So it helps us, and it just gives us that extra vetting process to make sure we're making the right decision. It allows us to say, to also share with council when we run council through this, to say, here's what staff scored it, here's what council scored it. Why is there a difference? Or, hey, they're similar. That's great. We're on the same page. And allows a way to be defensible from that perspective. So that's kind of how it will be applied. But there will be some training and there'll be some growing pains associated with it too. Every organization is different, and every organization I've worked in, I've had to adapt the policies that you've seen before you today to to accommodate that, and they will change over time. You know, we talked about flexibility and adaptability. If government's not flexible and adaptable, then we're not doing a good service, right?
Exactly. Well, and I'm glad to hear about the educational component because I think both staff and council could benefit from that. And then my last comment is on page 316.
I missed that, Councillor McMillan.
316.
Okay.
Sorry, I should face it's hard. My computer's on the angle. So number 17 and 18. You've got citywide pride for those. I'd prefer to see townwide pride, not city, because we're a town. So just, yeah, if you don't mind.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You bet.
No further questions for Chris. I will ask for a motion from Councillor McMillan that council adopt the financial management framework policy and the capital priority process policy.
I'll give you that motion.
Thank you. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thanks very much, Chris. Moving on to the Community Vitality Advisory Committee appointments. Pretty self-explanatory, Kara. I don't think we need, there's 2 appointments that we're doing today. So ask for a motion from Councillor Masterman that council appoint Joanne Van Donzel to the Community Vitality Advisory Committee for a 3-year term ending October 31st, 2023, and that council appoint Angie Brown to the Community Vitality Advisory Committee for a 1-year term ending October 31st, 2021.
Yes, I'd be happy to give you that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor? Motion is carried. I'll ask for a motion from Councillor Nychuk that council direct administration to continue with recruitment efforts to fill the existing vacancies on the High River Library Board and the Community Vitality Advisory Committee. Is there a vacancy on the advisory committee, Kara, with the 2 we just appointed?
Sorry, yes, there is. There's still one.
There's still 1 vacancy? Okay. Motion stands as read. Councillor Nychuk.
I'll give you that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. Okay, now item 8.7, the one that I've added into the coal policy. This is a monster one, you guys, that I've dove into and started watching some of the videos regarding this coal open pit coal mining that's going on down in southwest Alberta, and wasn't paying a lot of attention to it for quite a while, just because, you know, how does that have anything to do with High River? And you know, as Craig Snodgrass myself, yes, it absolutely concerns me with what's going on because I fish and stuff a bunch down there, but you know, there wasn't a High River issue at the time. But the more I got looking into this thing, and the more I started to educate myself on this deal, this whole thing stinks from start to finish. And there's many, many different layers to these projects that are going on with Grassy Mountain and Tent Mountain. They're the 2 that are slated and the big problems right now. But there's so many different layers, from the financial deal with the mining company to the water allocation to the rescindment that the government did behind closed doors with the coal policy to, and I've already lost a number of them, to how the royalties are handled. This thing's a big monster, and as I got going into it, it was very obvious to me that there's absolutely issues that can greatly, that impact High River today and impact all Albertans. This isn't about High River. What the government is doing with this open pit coal mining stretches from southwest Alberta to northwest Alberta. It is all the way through the province. And there's a lot of advocacy going on all the way through this. And if you look at Facebook group, Albertans Against Open Coal Pit Mining, that's a group that's from Edmonton that's fighting against this. And there's individuals, two individuals being Mac Blades and John Smith, ranchers from down south Nanton area, that have started to push back and fight against the provincial government due to their rescindment of our whole Alberta coal policy that was put in place in 1976 by the conservative Lougheed government, in order, because they could see at that point in time the sensitivity to these areas, and open coal pit mining was banned through that coal policy. So that is the number one issue right now that I think opens up the town of High River and anyone along the Highwood River for future dangers with this, because these coal mines right now, there's two that are kind of under exploration and everything else. They are old existing mines that were abandoned in the late 60s, and part of the reason why this policy was developed was to prevent that kind of stuff from happening again. And the policy put a ban on open pit coal mining, and everything had to be subsurface if you were going to do it. And this isn't a rant on anti-coal, but it is a rant on anti-dumb, I guess. Because the fact of the matter is, open coal pit mining has grave consequences for our environment and our watersheds. And the removal of this coal policy opens up class 2 and 3 lands for open coal pit mining. Now, on the Highwood River, the headwaters of Highwood reside in Kananaskis country, which is under class 1, which is still under protection right now. But if these other 2 mines are allowed to go, and the other 4 mines that are north of Grassy Mountain that come north up to the southern boundary of Kananaskis, if those are allowed to go, and the way this government is going with this coal policy, the other barriers under their auspice of red tape reduction, they're going to be eliminated as well. That's just the direction this thing is going. Now, I have no interest in just sitting on my hands right now and waiting for the coal mine to show up in Kananaskis country and then the town say, oh yeah, now it affects us. That would be the irresponsible way of doing things. We need to be ahead of this. We need to have the government reinstate this coal policy that protects our headwaters, protects our eastern slopes, and develops coal mining in a responsible way, if we're going there. I could get into the amount that I've learned in the last week or so, and where I started to be given documents and stuff as to how, and more information, and watching the videos and everything else that's going on in this issue. But it is very clear, this is not an issue that is sitting in Blairmore or Pincher Creek or Waldron or the just Grassy Mountain ranchers. That is not, it's far beyond that. This is every man, woman, and child in this province that should be very, very concerned with these projects. And number one, with how this coal policy was removed. So the coal policy has been in place. It was removed, rescinded in May, I think about May 15th of last year, 2020, right in the middle under the shadow of COVID, where nobody was paying much attention to anything else other than COVID. And they removed this policy that protects all of these lands and removed it without a single ounce of public consultation, Indigenous group consultation, environmental consultation. Not a single stakeholder was asked about this. It was just gone. So then I started asking a bunch of questions as to, well, how do you do that? That's political suicide. Like, we can't do that in the town of High River on virtually anything without doing open houses and consultation as to what we're doing. But it wasn't done. And it's very clear in an affidavit that was provided to us, to myself from that Michael Morris got with the Alberta government, was under oath testifying because of the lawsuit these ranchers have put forward to the government. But this thing clearly states that they knew there would be negative backlash from environmental groups and other land user stakeholders. It's written right in there. They knew there would be negative backlash in there, so they're not going to do it. They also state in there that they are going to do this because it is favorable to the coal industry. Now, that's the direction this province is headed. I don't care what your political stripes are. You should have major, major concerns as to how that was done. So if you think this just ends with Grassy Mountain, it doesn't. This is slated to head into Kananaskis, and now it's our watershed, it's our drinking water. We start talking to the drinking water and everything, all you got to do is go to Sparwood, BC, and see the effects that the massive tech mine that's been going for 50 some years has had on their drinking water. Tech has spent about $750 million trying to fix the selenium problem in the water there. They haven't figured it out yet. It's still there, and they're still drilling wells to try to provide clean water to the residents of Sparwood, and they've been unsuccessful in doing so. So that's my big problem right now, and I think we have to do our part in getting this policy reinstated and having the protections put back in place, rather than what has been opened up for a direct coal mining free-for-all in southern Alberta. I can go on and on. Bruce would be able to, Bruce was interviewed last week with Sun Country on far more the environmental impacts, which he is far more abreast on than I am. And but as for the town of High River, I would like us to lead this, and from a municipal standpoint, that this is wrong, the way this has been handled. This needs to be rewound. If there are changes to this policy that need to be made, public consultation, stakeholder engagement, Indigenous groups, environmental groups, all have to be engaged in whatever those proposed changes might be. The backdoor handling, the arrogance of this government to be able to think they can do this and just walk away from it and get away from it is not something that I'm willing to put up with. And again, I don't care what your political stripes are. You should be very, very concerned with this and what else is being done behind closed doors. Because if they're removing a coal policy, what else is happening under the cloud of COVID? So I am prepared to make a motion today, but I'm going to just open it up for questions and discussion. This issue, it's been a week and a half now of me drinking from a fire hose with getting up to speed on this, but the lawsuit that has been put against the government of Alberta over their handling of the coal policy, the government is currently trying to have that struck down and just thrown out without anything. Just make it go away. Same way they handled the coal policy. So there's nothing in this that's right. I have spoken to Roger Reed about it, and I have spoken to John Barlow, our MP, about it this morning. But I'll open it up for questions, comments. Bruce?
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass, and thanks for your leadership taking a stand on this. Some people might say, well, why are municipalities getting involved in this? And I'll tell you right away, there's at least two that have voted on this. The municipality of Crow's Nest Pass is supporting this because they think the 400 or so jobs that will pay about $100,000 a year, direct jobs for the mine, will do great things for the economy and for their economy, not the Alberta economy, for their economy, without really considering the collateral damage, the 2 million people downstream of the Grassy Mountain mine who get drinking water from the Oldman watershed, and the municipalities, Lethbridge, Fort Macleod, Medicine Hat. So they're involved. They've let government know this is just fine with them, and they say, and please take care of the environment. But mainly, we really want these jobs. And then there's the MDA Ranch land based in Chain Lakes, not far from us. And a lot of the ranchers who are opposing to this thing are represented by the MDA Ranch land. MDA Ranch land stands to make millions on taxes from this thing. They oppose it. They're not supporting it. To me, that's very telling that they're willing to forego all this tax revenue in order to protect the livelihood and the traditions of ranching, of recreation use up in that area. So it's interesting to me because Craig mentioned K Country, and no, right now none of the leases that have been sold are in K Country, but the government tried to before Christmas when they did their big lease sale. There were parcels down at Cataract Creek, which is the headwaters of, one of the headwaters and one of the major tributaries of the Highwood River, which of course we depend on. And they weren't able to sell those leases because people are nervous about K Country. Developing companies, coal mining companies are nervous about K Country because there are some regulatory protections put in for K Country. And the fear of many, including myself, is any government that could unilaterally, without public consultation, do away with a 1976 policy brought in by one of the most respected premiers, certainly the most respected Tory premier in the history of Alberta. If this government can just do away with that policy, then this government can also take away the protection that K Country has and open and make it possible from a regulation standpoint to have coal mines up there. And Craig mentioned Sparwood, and he mentioned the problems that they're having with their drinking water. Teck had to build a new water treatment plant for Sparwood, which spent millions and millions on this thing because they poisoned Sparwood's drinking water. That's not a chance I'm willing to take. And Craig also mentioned this is beyond politics. People want to make it about politics, and it's beyond politics. It's about our right to live with clean water and air and protect the environment, protect the landscape, protect the fish and wildlife, protect the traditional users, the First Nations, ranchers, other recreation users. And that's what it's all about. And I've seen emails from senior bureaucrats who sent their government bosses, MLAs, emails saying, you're making a big mistake if you take away this policy without public input. You're making a big mistake. There's going to be a big outcry. And they just said, we're doing it. I can't imagine that arrogance. I can't imagine us as a council ever doing anything like that, with that kind of arrogance that we can do this because we're the government. And so it's just, I don't have confidence in a government that has put economic advantage or economic benefit ahead of environmental and livelihood concerns. And I don't have confidence in that government to make sure this is a clean operation, to make sure that that there is no downstream impact, that to reclaim a mountain. Open pit mining is not like deep tunnel mining. You actually take off the tops of, I mean, all you have to do is drive west of Sparwood and towards Fernie, and you see what open pit mining is. And it just, there is no reclaiming the top of a mountain once it's removed. You can put grass up there, but you can't plant rocks. You can't plant mountaintops. So I think this is an issue that we have every right to be in, and would be really remiss if we weren't taking a lead role in this. And I'll be honest with you, I never dreamed that I would bring it to town council. I feel very strongly about this. I'm a counselor. When Craig said, I'm bringing it to council, I was very pleasantly surprised. And not surprised because it's not the type of thing he does. Just because I just thought how great that we have this ability. We can become one of the voices on this thing and we represent the people of High River. If they did go back on this decision and bring back the old coal policy, it'll mean we'd never see a coal mine up in the Cataract or the Highwood, anywhere up there. And we would never, and our kids and our grandkids and would never ever have to worry about selenium poisoning of the Highwood River. So anyway, I applaud you, Mr. Mayor, for doing this, and I really implore the rest of you to consider supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Carol.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Bruce, for your comments as well. I think it's very important that as a municipality that's going to be directly affected, that we should have a voice. So I am glad that this is coming forward. My question is though around what kind of feedback did you get from Roger and John?
I really like both of them, so I want to try to be careful. But they are both supporting these projects. They are both supporting both Grassy Mountain and Tent Mountain. And there's a viable reason. Kinda. If you're buying the sales pitch from the government and from Hancock, Riversdale, Benga Mining, they're all the same human beings. So if you're buying the sales pitch, what they are selling everybody on down south and our MLA and our MP is the fact that Grassy Mountain, which is 7 kilometers north of Blairmore, Tent Mountain is south of Coleman. Is that right, Bruce? Right, south of Coleman. So they're very close to each other, but they are old mines that were abandoned in the late 60s, and they were never reclaimed. They were, like John told me this morning, he said there's still equipment rusting out, sitting up there from the late 60s. They just walked away from it. Like I said, that's why, part of the reason why I think this 76 coal policy was put in place. And even when Roger was telling me on it, and Roger sent me pictures that he took, I think this summer, of Grassy and Tent, that they're being sold on the fact that, well, it's going to create all these jobs, number one, and in the end, it's going to run for 20, 25 years, and in the end, it's all going to be remediated and be way better than what it is right now, and it'll be just back to a pristine environment. That's bullshit. You like Bruce said, you cannot reclaim removing a mountain. You can't do that. It's not done in Sparwood. If you look at the areas that have been reclaimed in Sparwood, it's not back to the way it was. So they are both saying, and on the same page, that, you know, if we can get some, you know, it sounds good if we can get some remediation out of this, and you know, it's a real benefit. We get the jobs and the royalties that are coming off of this, which when I look at the royalty deal, I'm thinking, Alberta, you're going to lose money on this. This isn't an investment to gain money for economic prosperity in Alberta. Like I'm looking at it that we're going to lose money on this, just the coal market and everything else that's going on. So that's where they're at. On the future mines coming north, Roger was very clear that he's got clear questions on touching pristine, untouched grounds. John seems to be more on the side of being against any new mines coming north. But you know, John's speaking with the federal Minister of Environment, Mr. Wilkinson. He's speaking with him tomorrow, I understand, and the you know, but Roger's open for discussion on the new mines.
And what was their feedback regarding the lack of transparency about this, how this was handled?
Well, it's not John's government, so he.
No, but I mean, Roger.
Yeah. Sad to say, but much like our COVID times, Roger doesn't seem to know much about it.
Because I think that's the part that I find really appalling, because you brought up the same point.
I mentioned documents that I have in my possession now that were not hard to get a hold of. They're public documents. This affidavit that's public record and speaks directly to the decisions the government of Alberta made and why they made it. Roger said he didn't know anything about it, and so I emailed it to him. So, you know, it's a massive disappointment, and this is one of the big problems that we found out about COVID, is that so much of this stuff is being led by our premier and a handful of other ministers up there, and they're not even telling their local MLAs. There's a sales pitch there, toe the line, follow the direction, and do not make any waves, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and you brought up an interesting point, Craig, about it. in the thick of COVID as well. And this isn't just on the provincial level. I can only imagine what's being thrust through on the federal level as well. I mean, it's just a terrible time, but yeah. But no, thank you.
And, you know, I'll be fair, like this was proceeding under the NDP government as well. But the NDP government left the coal policy in place, which forces these coal companies to go subsurface, which they don't like because it's expensive. They won't like that. So that's why UCP just said, "Man, we'll just get rid of that." And it's written right in the affidavit. It's actually written, it's not even in the affidavit. There's a CBC story on this where the government and Minister Jason Nixon speaks directly to it, that this was done to stimulate economic investment. And that's why we removed the coal policy. That's what they're trying to do. And the reason why they're trying to do it, because they have nothing else to hang their hat on in that regard for what they promised this province in the last election, that they were going to do that. And they've been unsuccessful doing it. So now they're just tearing up policies to try to make it happen. And we're going to stand up against it because it's Alberta and we're Albertans and this is our province, not yours. So that's my take. So, Bruce, before I go to you, I'm going to go to Jamie first, please.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. I appreciate all your comments and Councillor Masterman. Appreciate all your comments as well. I've been involved in the coal industry for many, many, many years, probably since I was about 22 years old. I'm still down there on a regular basis. So I'm a little mixed. I'm hearing two messages coming here in this debate, and I totally support the way this was done wrong. I agree 100% that there should have been open, transparent discussion about this whole thing, and the right processes should have followed. And I will support this council and anybody else that wants to talk about that that's a wrong way of doing things. But I'm not anti-coal, right? So I get, we're on one hand, I feel like we're saying we're anti-coal. We don't want coal mines in the province. And on the other hand, and we're saying about the policy. So I'd like more clarity on that, on where we're going. Yeah. I guess that's what I'd like. I got to say, this is a really hard one for me because I earn a living from the coal mines. A lot of our staff here in Calgary earn a living from there. I deal with the businesses down there all the time. It's a tough one for me. I'm not supportive of opening up Kananaskis or any of these other areas. But I get the picture of why they want it down there, why Crow's Nest wants it.
Yeah.
So
and
that's where I'm coming from.
Excellent points, Jamie, because you can go down, you can pick 9 different roads if you want to fight this thing, right? The motion that I'm going to bring up in just a few minutes here is directly towards the removal of the coal policy and having it reinstated. That we're focused on that. That's our skin in the game. We can have our personal opinions on. I'm not anti-coal. I don't like it, but I'm, if we need it for, energy production for this province and everything else, yeah. I'm not a big fan of an Australian company coming in, taking advantage of this province and shipping all this coal over to China. And that's where it's all going. It's not staying in Canada. It's not headed to Ontario for their steel plants and everything else. It's not going there. It's all going China and India. So what I am against is the open pit coal mining on our eastern slopes. Those are lands that are sacred to Alberta. And I can be swayed probably on the subsurface stuff if it's absolutely necessary, and I can see an actual economic benefit that makes sense for the greater good of Alberta, if I can see that. That's not in here yet. We can get into the water allocation and how they're handling that for these guys, and that's a whole other monster, but that's somebody else's. There's many people that are fighting that one as well. So so I'll go back to Bruce, and then I'm going to go to the motion and we can discuss the motion.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. I just wanted to point out the policy that was brought in 1976 by Lougheed's government. It came about after extensive public consultation among industry, among residents, among user groups, and it didn't totally stop open pit mining. And I just wanted to gently correct you on that a little, Mr. Mayor. But it did stop it in certain areas, including the areas that are now being affected. And because what the policy said is we're not going to allow it in places where the impact far outweighs any economic benefit, the impact on the environment particularly, and on downstream users. And it's not totally correct. It is, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, to say that this was brought in without that the policy was taken away, rescinded without any public consultation. They did consult, and it's been well documented. I'm not making this up. They consulted with the Coal Association of Canada, represented by a guy named Robin Campbell, who's a former cabinet minister, Tory cabinet minister in Alberta. He came and he met with Nixon and he said, we need this policy lifted so that we can go to town here. And I think it's that aspect, and Councillor Kinghorn, totally, I get it. People make a living off this thing, and I'm not against people making a living. I'm against governments being totally arrogant and underhanded in how they bring about this. And to make a decision based on lobbying by an industry that has huge vested interests in a policy's removal, and then remove that policy without asking the very people that Lougheed talked to before bringing it in, is just, to me, unconscionable. So that's all. I got lots more I could say, Craig, but I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. No, good point. Like this, the consultation was directly through one group and one person, former Energy Minister Robin Campbell, who is now the head president of the Canadian Coal Association. He asked for it, he got it. No wonder he's in the press saying this is great news. Shocker. So I'm going to put forth a motion that Town of High River Council direct administration to draft a letter to Premier Jason Kenney requesting the immediate reinstatement of the 1976 Alberta coal policy, which was rescinded, came into effect on June 1st, 2020. Also requesting that the government of Alberta begin public consultation with Indigenous groups, environmental groups, and all Albertan stakeholders on any proposed revisions to this policy. This will be CC'd to Environment Minister Jason Nixon, Energy Minister Sonia Savage, as well as the MLA for Highwood Livingston, Roger Reed. So I am in the chat box here. I will hit enter. And the motion is in your chat box. So I will open up discussion on the motion, amendments if you'd like to make them or anything else. So give you a minute to read it.
Mayor Snodgrass?
Yeah, go ahead,
If
Jamie.
I may add also that I might say, I might replace that with further.
Oh, instead of also?
Yeah.
Yeah, friendly amendment taken. Thank you. Well said. Councillor Nychuk?
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. Just another friendly amendment in the sentence, all Albertans on any proposed revisions to the policy. I'm just throwing this out there, revisions or replacement to this policy. So if they're planning on something new in there, you're also stating that these consultations need to happen if they're absolutely replacing the policy currently in existence. Or
Yeah, I love it.
that was in existence.
Yeah, I love it. Well stated, taken as a friendly amendment. And yes, Carol, I will be forwarding this to you as soon as we're done here. So
I could say just on any changes to this policy. Proposed changes, but whatever. I
kind of like where Michael's going though, Bruce, because that's that policy. If they just completely switch it out to something different, then I think that kind of protects a replacement. So I would take that one. So just in, with this, and if this motion passes, of course, I'm going to be asked about it in the press, and I'm going to be pushing that angle as well. But I'm also going to be making the CMRB, the Calgary Metropolitan Region Board, aware of this, because these coal mines do affect everybody all the way through Alberta. So I'm going to make these guys aware of it as well. And trying to gain support from other municipalities to step up and do what's right and speak against what this government has done with the removal of this policy. So, Jamie, you made a great point there that, your ideas on coal mining and type of coal mining and where the coal's going and environmental impacts and everything, that's a little separate fight. We're focusing on, hey, government, you stepped over a boundary there. We need to rewind this. So that's where we're at today. Any further amendments or changes to this wording before I ask for the question? Therefore, I will ask the question. All in favor? Raise your hand. Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much.
And good job. Thank you for spearheading this, Craig.
Well, your article in Sun Country, a few people that made me kind of start paying attention to this thing a little bit, and the deeper I got into it, the more concern I had for Alberta and for High River with being a free-for-all coming north to us. So not willing to sit by and wait. So congratulations to all of council for taking the leadership for this province and doing our part to help this fight, because I'll tell you what, the true heroes in this whole thing is, Mac Blades kind of started this, but John Smith joined him, and then the Pakisco group that has others with Gordon Cartwright and the Hugheses and, all these ranching families along our eastern slopes. That's the Damons, and they're the ones that are fighting this and fighting this policy in the courts now. But policy removal, fighting it in the courts, and we need to make it bigger and help them out and do the right thing, because this is our province, not the government's. Good on that one. Thank you very much. A whole bunch of council correspondence. Lots of Christmas cards.
Mayor Snodgrass,
Yes, ma'am.
can I make a comment about one of the Christmas cards, please?
Sure.
So Aaron O'Toole's struck me a little bit because it says 2020 has been a difficult year for too many Canadians. Wishing you comfort and joy this holiday season. I just thought, you know what? How much money are these cards costing? Only to be reminded that, yeah, it's been a difficult year for everyone. So I had a bit of a hoot with that about like, what a Debbie Downer card. And then, oh, by the way, wishing you comfort and joy. So
Thanks for stuffing 2020 into one sentence. Hey, Brett. Enjoy your trip to Hawaii. Anyways, that's it. That's all. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned at 5:35 p.m.